is seen by many of our generation to be one of the greatest, if not the greatest, gaming consoles ever created. The jump from the Nintendo to the Super Nintendo was indeed a landmark one, ushering in the 16-bit era along with the Sega Genesis. It was state-of-the-art, boasting new graphics and gameplay that had never been seen before, and with it, brought some of the genre's most timeless and classic games. Super Mario World, Chrono Trigger, Donkey Kong Country, Star Fox, Final Fantasy IV and VI, just to name a few. 20 years have passed since the Super Nintendo was released in the United States, and it is here where we reminisce the halcyon age of that beloved console right here on Downloadable Content. Welcome everyone to this Super Nintendo Love Fest of an episode we call Downloadable Content. I am Brian, and with me we have Peter.
Hi.
Ron.
Hello.
Ronnie!
Hi!
Very cheerful greeting there, yes. The Rons are back, and with it, all sorts of time paradoxes, the usual stuff that you can only get right here on Downloadable Content. How are we all doing?
Well,
Tired.
Like, let me off this thing. Everyone's back to school now, back to work.
Yes.
The school buses
Yes.
are out, making my commute to work an interesting one.
Oh,
And the fact
my
that you just
college.
had a hurricane hit you.
Well,
Yes, we had not only a hurricane and a tropical storm.
we've had hurricanes, tropical storms, and earthquakes. I want my free blizzard, damn it.
not
You're
allowed.
also missing fire in that equation somewhere.
Next is going to be frogs and locusts. That's what we're going to get. It's just going to be just the whole Northeast is going to be plagued with plague. Is what's going to happen.
I was waiting for thunder snow and a tornado.
Oh, you didn't? You mean you didn't get that on the Cape there?
No, we didn't get the thunder snow. Not this time.
Oh, that's depressing.
I know, it's
I'm
my
pretty sure
favorite
you're
part.
listening to politicians.
Point.
Yes, well. But here we are. 20 years ago this year, the Super Nintendo was released in the United States. It actually came out in August of 1991. And with it, so began the great Nintendo and Sega war. But before we get...
Actually, I think it goes back a little further, but this is really where the height of it happened.
Well, the Genesis came out in the United States in 1989, but it really didn't start getting into gear until, Super Nintendo and Sega started launching, commercials at each other. I remember...
Really? I mean, when the Genesis first came out, at least up where I am, it kind of was the big thing until Super Nintendo really took off.
I honestly don't remember hearing anything about the Sega Genesis until the Super Nintendo came out. I mean, I remember the commercials in the early 90s for the Genesis, specifically, Sega does what Nintendo don't,
Well,
Well,
there's also the Master System that came out before the Genesis, although it didn't go anywhere.
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, kind of died in the water.
It did. But before we get into too much craziness about the Genesis and Super Nintendo war, let's talk a bit about the system itself. Nintendo seemed to like the color gray, so they kept the gray theme going. Just this...
Don't forget, for a bit of color, they added in those purple power pads.
Yes. Yeah, the Japanese controller actually had red, yellow, green, and blue, but in here in America, we had these purple shaded colors in the buttons.
We don't like color schemes. It's just... But no, I mean, obviously, it was called, Super Famicom.
Yep.
In Japan. I mean, largely, they were pretty much the same system. Although Nintendo still figured out a way to do regional lockout by using 2 different types of cartridge.
They're a master of that.
You could not be a master of unlocking for cartridges. You could try, but it was a very difficult thing to do.
Well, we didn't have Jill Valentine at that point.
Not yet. We did not have Jill. We did not have Jill Valentine. We didn't. I don't think we even had voice acting yet. It was just. I mean.
Yes, we did.
We did. I don't recall.
We did have voice
Some
acting.
Super Nintendo games did have very short snippets of audio. I remember one in particular, NBA Jam.
Oh,
Yep.
I did. I've never played a Super Nintendo game that had voice acting. So
They were not very
NBA
common, but they were
Jam.
out there. Star Fox.
NBA Jam.
No, wait, no, Star
and
Fox had a
Ocean.
little. Star Ocean, Star Fox had a little bit in the intro, although they went back to the squabble speak after you actually started playing.
yes, I remember that very distinctly. In fact, I prefer the squabble speak to do a barrel roll of Star Fox 64. But
Did the Mortal Kombat game have any voice acting? I can't remember.
yes, the Super
Yes,
Nintendo.
yes, it did.
Super Nintendo had the little snippets of Shao Kahn and Shang Tsung.
Get over here.
Get over here!
Scorpion,
Okay.
Scorpion as well. So yeah, little tiny snippets, but nothing majorly extravagant.
No, there was not enough space on the ROM chips to do anything extravagant in that time period.
But I mean, just the system itself. The graphic capability of the system at the time, just the jump from Nintendo to Super Nintendo was so. It wasn't like technology of today where a new version of a piece of technology consists of, slight improvements. This was a giant.
This is a leapfrog. Huge leap.
This isn't what Apple does now and release, iPhone 1, 2, 3, 7,000 with just slight incremental upgrades.
Well, it's not even the equivalent of the Xbox 360, or any of the PS2 to PS3. I mean, there are changes, but just the sheer magnitude of the differences between these 2 generations was huge.
Not just keep in mind too, like the original Nintendo came out in what, 86, 85?
The Nintendo came out in this country, I believe, in 85.
Yeah, so you're talking 6 years, assuming you follow Moore's law, which is memory and processing power doubles and shrinks in size every 18 months roughly. You're talking about 4 or 5 iterations almost of technology improving from the NES into the Super NES.
Yeah, I mean, it was just you couldn't believe this was a giant leapfrog in terms of graphical capability, processing capability. I mean, just in terms of let's see, just even sound quality greatly improved. You could actually get away with almost fast moving gameplay, like in games like F-Zero or Star Fox. Capabilities that the NES could not do, or at least not that well. So it was just a huge leap forward in technology, and again, unlike anything we had ever seen. And because it's Nintendo, of course, they have to release their systems with, a whole bunch of peripherals. Some that were made early on and some that were later created. The Super Scope, which was basically the Super Nintendo version of the Zapper.
If you want to compare a pistol to a bazooka.
Yeah, it was pretty big. There was a lot of plastic used.
Yeah.
I never owned one myself.
I do.
I've seen 2. I held one, and the only other one I saw was in the Super Mario Brothers movie, which is where I think it should belong.
Useless piece of... The Super Advantage, which was, again, just an arcade-style joystick controller made for the Super Nintendo. The only one of these peripherals I actually had was the Super Nintendo mouse that came with Mario Paint.
Yes.
And I did have Mario Paint. I never used it all that much, but I did have it.
Oh, that game ate away at my childhood. Oh, you won't believe the different things that I did with that game. I designed my own Legend of Zelda and took pictures of it.
That almost sounds vaguely vulgar. Of all the things you did with Mario Paint. I mean, listen to yourself. The Super Multi-Tap, which, again, I never owned, but that was created primarily for the Bomberman series of games.
It was actually... That's unlike a lot of these peripherals. That one actually had a use in a couple different games, though.
Okay, I mean, I know it was primarily made for the Bomberman series, but it did have use in other games.
Sports games, primarily.
Yes.
Where you pit a couple people against each other.
Right. I think the most popular, though, of the peripherals was the Super Game Boy. I mean, for me, it was the one I heard the most about. That basically, Super Game Boy, you stick it in the cartridge slot of your Super Nintendo, and then you put a Game Boy cartridge on top of that, and now you can play your Game Boy games right on your TV instead of looking at this, couple inch by couple inch view screen.
You also get the benefit
improved
of
on the
tinting
Game Boy.
it.
Try that again. You both ran over each other.
It improved on the original Game Boy because the original Game Boy had just the 4 shades of gray. But the Super Game Boy allowed programmers to put color palettes in so you could actually see the game in actual color. It wasn't great detail color, but it was an improvement over the black and white of the original Game Boy.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, it went from basically black and white to duotone or like shades of blue or shades of red. And you could choose almost on the fly, I think, what those color palettes would be.
I have used the Super Game Boy. I never owned one, but I've played on it, and I was just like, wow, this is a nice change.
Much better contrast. Makes it much easier to play the games.
And it was the precursor to the Game Boy Color, so that was the next evolution. That was the next step in the evolution of the Game Boy. But yeah, and I remember seeing things for the Super Game Boy the most. I never really heard or saw too much about these other peripherals. I mean, none of the games I played for Super Nintendo ever had a use for them. So I just kind of avoided them. But when the system did launch in August of 1991, there were 5 launch titles. The first of them being the most popular. It was the #1 selling game of the Super Nintendo era, mostly because it came with the system, Super Mario World.
One of the best games of all time.
Super Mario World, it is a definite timeless classic. F-Zero.
One of my personal favorites.
That gave us Captain Falcon.
That game just is so underrated, I think. It was a great game, but it never really took off the way the others did.
I think part of the reason for that too was it didn't take off was it was a fun game. It was a nice racing game, but it looked pretty weird in the sense of you're driving a blue, green, red, or yellow car around this track, and you get speed boosts and acid pits, and you really can't tell what's going on in the background. You see that it's like what's supposed to be like a cityscape underneath you, and you have no clue what the hell it is. And it's just kind of all moving by at like a ridiculously fast speed. So it's kind of hard to see what's going on.
It struck me as a research and development effort to try something new, and it was very new for the time. It was a complete game, but at the same time struck me as more of an experiment in new design than an act in trying to make something that's meant to sell like Super Mario World sold. Do you know what I mean by that?
Elaborate a little bit.
Well, it's like it's just saying that there is not a lot to it. You had 4 different cars. You had 15 tracks. Some of them were just variations on already existing tracks. The scenery was rather limited, although still pretty neat to look at. Because the Mode 7 can't do parallax scrolling, you had only just the one layer, which kind of didn't give you the sense of depth that you were looking for. But the Mode 7 was still a step and that allowed you to have that kind of perspective view you had never seen before. So it just struck me as that was really, yeah, it was an experiment. But after playing like F-Zero on the N64 and F-Zero on the GameCube, I think it was a rather successful tech demo.
Well, F-Zero did spawn several more games after that. I mean, like I said, it brought us.
I mean, I think Mario Kart was based on that kind of style.
Except
with the perspective graphics.
much slower, not quite as fast.
Right. They did slow it down.
Incredibly so. So, the other launch titles, Pilot Wings, which I never played. I never played Pilot Wings.
I have. It was another take on the whole perspective they were trying to do with the Mode 7. Only this time now you can also go up and down as well as just forward and back. They had a bunch of different simulations. I remember the hang glider. I think there may have been a biplane. I don't remember exactly.
Yep, there was a
It was just kind of
hang glider, biplane. You had a rocket pack that you had.
That's right, the rocket pack.
Yep. And I think that was it, just the three of them.
And there was just a bunch of little mini games trying to test your skill. Can you accomplish little goals? It was kind of like another tech demo.
Another game that came out was Gradius 3.
Oh, that by Konami. I remember a lot of magazines really ripped this game apart for the constant slowdown it experienced due to probably inexperienced programming with a brand new console.
This was another one that I somehow avoided for some reason. I mean, I liked the fact that Nintendo was varying it up here. It wasn't just all first party.
Well, Gradius 3 was just another Gradius game, and it really for the new generation. So it wasn't bad, it wasn't great. I mean, if that depends on how much you like Gradius, I guess.
Yeah, but at least back then they were trying to have launch titles, unlike the 3DS.
Ouch, burn.
Oh yeah, that's definitely a failhorn moment for Nintendo there. And the last launch title that the Super Nintendo had was SimCity.
Oh, God.
But it was a very good implementation of the classic.
That brought SimCity... SimCity had a lot of attention before that, but it gave SimCity even more of a blow-up to a whole generation of kids who might not have played it at this point.
And I thought SimCity was primarily a PC
It was originally for the
title.
PC, yes. The Super Nintendo version was a lot improved.
Because I've only played SimCity on the PC. It's one of the few PC games I've played.
This is what got me into the series, the Super Nintendo one. It's what got me and all my friends into the series. We'd never played... I mean, at that point, most of us didn't have computers. We hadn't, other than using them at school. And this it gave us a chance to get into SimCity, and oh my God, how much time that ate up.
And all of
It's interesting that Dr. Wright was strictly in the Nintendo icon for SimCity.
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, found fame as an assist trophy in Super Smash Bros. Brawl. But, just an interesting side note there. But yeah, those were the 5 launch titles. Of the 5, obviously, I think Super Mario World is the one that sticks out the most in my mind, for very obvious reasons. We will definitely squee all over that game in the second half. It was, I think it was probably, it wouldn't surprise me if it was. It was probably the first Super Nintendo game I played. I mean, there was a couple of others that I played right around when I started playing Super Nintendo, like Mortal Kombat and things like that. As we touched on earlier, this really was when the Genesis and Super Nintendo wars really kicked into high gear. To the point where gamers, I mean, this is kind of like Yankees Red Sox. You really couldn't play both sides of the fence.
And the funny part
I can say that Go ahead.
No, you can go.
Go ahead.
Okay. The funny part
I
is...
was going to say,
You go. You go.
We're going
You
to
go.
each other until we run over each other again?
Ronnie, go.
Okay. What I was going to say is the funny part is with the Super Nintendo Genesis war is it didn't just end up being Super Nintendo versus Genesis. You always had to take something on one side to compare it to something on the other. You had the Final Fantasies on the Super Nintendo, you had Phantasy Star on the Genesis, and you had just as many arguments about which one of those is better. You had Mortal Kombat on the Genesis, even though it was on both. The Genesis people called Mortal Kombat because it had the blood, and nobody was going to deny that. Versus Street Fighter on the SNES. You always had one style of game. It's the same style of game, but you always had one on one side, one on the other, and you'd have all kinds of arguments on which one was better, and that was just as much at the heart of it as the Super Nintendo versus Genesis. It was always, you had to separate the games.
Right, it was either Final Fantasy, Fantasy Star, and of course, don't forget.
Had the tech discussion.
Don't forget Mario versus Sonic.
Of course.
Oh yeah.
But that was too obvious.
Well, it had to be mentioned. I couldn't let this podcast go by without that being mentioned. It was. Now, Peter.
There was also the tech discussions too that were mostly just bullshit.
Okay, elaborate.
Yeah.
Do you remember the whole talk about blast processing? The marketing myth. I study computer science. There is no such technical word as blast processing.
Well,
never has been.
Explain what it is to our listeners who may not know what that is.
Okay. Started off with the commercials for Sonic the Hedgehog 2 that Genesis had the blast processing, which made it the faster system. Which is peculiar as that, came around, 1992, when the system already been out for 3 years. Where was it back then? But really, as I understand the story, what happened is one Sega engineer was talking to the marketing representatives on some trick he did with programming, where he declared, "I can blast these pixels to the screen." So the marketing people were like, "Oh, I like that." So they invented the term blast processing. What the engineer really was referring to was he found a way to do a timing trick where he could actually load one screen while displaying another, but the trick itself was very unreliable. It didn't work most of the time. So it really was just a bunch of crap in the end.
Well, I remember, I was firmly on the Nintendo side of this, mostly because I never owned a Genesis until, shortly before I went to college. So, I was, I grew up with the Super Nintendo, although I did enjoy Sonic the Hedgehog, I still do. And, of course, the Sega Channel. But no, this was all-out war. This was, beautiful to watch, if only frustrating, but you could not be on one side or the other. And you're right, for every style of game, the other had to try to outdo it. You mentioned Mortal Kombat. Even though, yes, it ended up released for both systems, the original Mortal Kombat outsold the Super Nintendo version 3-1 simply because blood.
Mm-hmm.
Sega was like,
it wasn't just the blood. Because correct me if I'm wrong, but it's been a long time since I played them both. But the SNES one also had slowdowns that the Genesis one didn't, because it wasn't a perfect port.
I have not played both versions. I'm much more familiar with the Super Nintendo version than with the Genesis version, so I cannot prove or deny that.
I would corroborate that the Genesis version did run smoother than the first one did, as Mortal Kombat 2 is much improved on the Super Nintendo over Mortal Kombat 1, though.
Well, they kind of planned at that point that they were going to go to both systems. When they made the first Mortal Kombat, they just kind of designed it for Genesis, and then Super Nintendo just kind of was a bonus for them.
Yeah, Nintendo
It's also kind of interesting too that Mortal Kombat's like probably one of the first multi-platform games ever.
That is true. Yeah. That is true. We start now getting into. You bring up a good point.
Hey, SimCity beat it.
You bring up
PC first.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, okay. Let's put games that are designed primarily for consoles are getting ported to a separate console.
I mean, what we have here is, and continuing with from the NES, just this giant boom in arcade ports.
Oh.
Just it seemed like every arcade game was getting ported over.
It was. I mean, you already did most of the work with the programming already. So I mean, for them.
The ironic thing, though, is most arcade games back then were made with a Motorola 68000 processor, which is the same chip in the Genesis. But in my experience, most of these games ported better to the Super Nintendo, probably for more effort put into it.
All right. But yes, it's the arcade games were getting ported left and right, and it is true. We start really seeing, cross-platform, multi-platform games just really take off now. I mean, Nintendo, up until this point, had pretty much nearly all the market share. It was, now up comes this Sega, and now now the battle lines are drawn. You have to decide where your allegiances are going to fall, and, there you go. And, while we're talking about Mortal Kombat, this was probably the biggest thing that set off the violent video games controversy, because now, suddenly these violent arcade games were being made available to a much, much wider audience in terms of both the Genesis and the Super Nintendo.
Oh, there was a media moral panic.
Just like with every other media.
Yeah, because this is right around the time when arcades started, the arcade bubble burst for the most part, and arcades started closing down left and right. And the people that are the studios that are bleeding money, trying to pay off all their loans and stuff like that, they're like, well, it's only going to cost us like $100 to port this thing to the SNES or Genesis. Maybe we can make a little bit of money off of this.
And then that little bit of money turned into their weight in gold.
Yes, it did. And, I mean, Super Nintendo had the Street Fighter II port.
It kind of boggles my mind a little bit that until Super Nintendo, until that era, Super Nintendo Genesis, it seemed like a lot of people didn't realize how much money was to be made in video games, which always seemed odd because Nintendo really did do well. It had a lot of things behind it, but I guess the rest of the world didn't get the memo until the next generation.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the era where people really started to take video games seriously.
Oh, that still hasn't happened.
Well, more seriously.
That's debatable.
I think that video games were at this point at the very least starting to be looked at as something more than just a kid's toy.
Just don't tell a human resources person you're a gamer. You will not get that job.
I would say that this is the time. This is right around. This is compared to like the NES era and the Atari era. This is around the times when the media starts paying attention to video games, which I mean, you essentially just get into a whole new audience of people talking about, or just talking about your game. Well, I mean, the phrase "bad news is good news" is not a lie. I mean, you talk bad about a game, it either means either a game sucks, or if it's like the violent video games of like Mortal Kombat and like the blood and stuff, then you're going to have the edgy teenagers going for that to rebel against their parents, and then the parents are kind of like, oh,
there's no such thing as bad advertising.
This is a violent video game.
Well, yeah, I mean, really,
when we can play on the Super Nintendo and play Super Mario.
Yeah, really, with the violent video games like Mortal Kombat, being made now to a much wider audience, that once you start getting parents involved, then the discussion has shifted. Once the moral police get involved because of so what if there's some animated decapitation?
Yeah, well, that just makes it all the more appealing.
Well, yeah, and I was just going to say that because now people were thinking, especially with Mortal Kombat, like, ooh, what is this they're talking about? I want to go have a look at this. And, this was a gold mine for Midway, Acclaim, and anyone else involved in Mortal Kombat. This was just an explosion. I mean, it ended up, this helped to create, all this controversy ended up making the Entertainment Software Rating Board, the ESRB, but it now got people talking. I think video games were starting to grow up a little here with this generation. I mean, it was still, a lot of games that were made were still, primarily marketed to kids, but this is when I think there was a little bit of a maturing here.
And nowadays, when the moral police are up in arms about a video game, that's when all the parents go out and go, that's the game I need to go buy and play.
Yeah.
How many of you guys have ever walked into a GameStop only to have some irate parent ripping their staff a new one over the violent games they sell?
Oh yes, games. It's the violent games of today that make the Super Nintendo violent games look like Kirby.
Play-Doh.
Not just Kirby.
Also keep in mind too that
I'm surprised nobody objected to Kirby. Kirby sucks things, eats them. Where's the?
Yeah, well, Mario eats mushrooms.
Out stars.
Pac-Man is definitely the
Keep in mind
cause
too.
of United
There
States
is some.
obesity.
Pac-Man eats performance-enhancing drugs. That's what he does.
And keep in mind too, this is also when we get everyone's favorite activist, Thompson, starts appearing all over TV.
Oh yeah.
Which is just
him.
Yeah. That guy needs to stay in Florida with all the other retirees.
Yeah, let's just flush him down the toilet, all right? He has no place in this discussion. Let's just get him out of the way. So, as we wind down this first half, we've given you the groundwork here, the Super Nintendo, the beginnings for launch titles, the peripherals, the beginnings of the great Genesis and Super Nintendo war. On our second half is when we're just going to start fanboying everywhere. We're going to take a trip down memory lane and just start reminiscing some of the timeless classic games that were made for the Super Nintendo and our experiences playing them, and in some cases still playing them, 20 years later. So that is coming up on the second half of this episode of Downloadable Content. Do not hit that reset button. We'll be right back. Welcome back to this second half of our Super Nintendo reminiscence. We're all still here. We have not left. We're all still together. Patched together by the miracle of the internet. All hail the internet.
We are not
Resistance
worthy.
is futile.
Yes. Yes. All right. So, we've laid down the foundations for the Super Nintendo, but now in this second half, we are going to get to the heart of the matter. We're going to talk about some, and by no means this is an exhaustive list, because we've only have, a set time in which to discuss our favorite games. Otherwise, we could probably go on for at least 5 hours. At the very least. Probably just an hour on Chrono Trigger alone. But maybe that'll be a separate podcast. Who knows? But I am going to open with the game that was the number one seller for the Super Nintendo, Super Mario World. It was
it's easy to become the number one seller when you come with the system.
Yeah, it's...
That's a nice way of guaranteeing your sales there, Nintendo.
And Nintendo still plays that game. For example, Wii Sports is the number one selling game for the Wii because it kind of comes with the system.
Well, it didn't. Not every Super Nintendo package came with the game. The inexpensive, the $100 package didn't. But there was still that factor that a lot of them did. Mine did.
But just from the beginning of the game, you knew that you were in for something really unlike any Mario game you had played before, because up until this point, the main Mario games were 1, 2, which wasn't even the true 2 in the United States, and 3. But this was an altogether new and interesting animal. For example, the character of Yoshi, which was largely unknown to us until that game.
The question mark box.
Yep. The exclamation point box.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yes, the exclamation point box. We had the question mark boxes forever.
The cape.
Oh yeah, the power-ups, the ability to hold a power-up in storage
It really seemed a natural evolution, though. It wasn't like when they skipped from World to 64. It was more like from how you went from Mario to Mario 3. You could see how they got there, but 3 was a huge improvement. This seemed like that kind of incremental improvement.
And, for the first time, a save function in a Mario game.
Oh, thank God.
For the first time.
Well,
how big the game was, though. You needed it.
Well, yeah,
Super Mario Bros. 3 needed it and didn't have it.
Yes. Yes, that was...
Well, you get lucky with the flute.
Yeah, but who uses the warp whistle? Well...
If you want to get done with the game in 5 minutes, you use the warp whistle.
Yeah, well, that's for pansies.
Well, when you spent the last, 3 days going through playing the game and leaving your system on overnight while you're at school so you could just keep playing, and then your system turns off, that's when you use the warp whistle.
Well, yes, the NES was notorious, especially for games that you couldn't, really play in one sitting, like Mario 3, which was just, oh my god, fucking long. But yes, Mario World, again, very beautiful looking game. Yoshi,
Yoshi, one of the best thing to introduce into Mario for me.
That is true, and I have to agree. I think it was one of the best things that could have come in the Mario series was Yoshi. And different colored ones, too. Had different abilities, depending on the color.
Or the shell you ate, because sometimes you'd eat the red shell and he starts breathing fire, or you get lucky and you eat the blue shell and he actually starts flying.
Oh, and then you have the hidden levels, the Star World, and the world beyond that. Gnarly, tubular, awesome, radical, whatever. And the introduction of... Oh no, were the Koopalings in Mario 3? Or there was this...
Koopalings were in Mario 3.
Okay. But now I think they had names, finally.
They had names in Mario 3.
They did? Okay. So
They actually changed some of the names, though.
Okay. It's been such a long time since I've beaten Mario 3. But,
Well, the only reason you knew that they had names in Mario 3 is if you read the instruction booklet.
Okay. And who the fuck reads instruction manuals for games?
Apparently me.
And you know, I'll rant about that later. I'll rant about instruction manuals later. But this game was just absolutely fabulous and had tons of replay value. This, I mean, again, the same premise. Princess Peach, dumb woman. Kidnapped by Bowser, yeah. And you have to go through. But the game had, what did we come up with? Almost 100 levels?
I think the final count was 96.
That's a lot of levels! If you were a completist, and believe me, I was one of them, for that game, yes.
What was the time limit that you had per stage? 500 seconds?
It depended on the stage. Not all of them had the same, number of Mario seconds.
Still, you average. Let's assume you spend 3 minutes per stage. That's probably being too gracious. Let's go like 4 minutes per stage. You're talking 36 hours at least.
Yeah, you're doing
nonstop.
You're doing math again.
I just looked it up just because we were talking about it. There were a total of 96 stages in Super Mario World.
So that is confirmed. 96. Okay. Still, I think that's more than any of the other games to that point. It was... Because you didn't have, and correct me if I'm wrong, you didn't have, hidden levels and optional levels in the previous Mario games up to this point.
Mario 3 was long, but that was just because of the fact that you had to beat 12 stages to get through one world.
Mario 3 also did have it. It didn't really have hidden stages, but it did have optional ones because you could take different routes through the overworld in a couple of them.
Right, and this game really expanded on it. I mean, you had levels with multiple exits, multiple ends, and some of the, depending on which ending of the level you chose would open up one path. Some would open up another path. Now, wasn't this annoying, the fact that you couldn't bring Yoshi with you into a ghost house? Or,
Yoshi's afraid of ghosts.
This was so annoying, because Yoshi was, Yoshi was your buffer in that game, and if you got hit, you'd just jump off of Yoshi, and, you'd have to try to get him back, instead of, getting shrunk or dying.
Not only that, but Yoshi could walk and jump on certain things that Mario without Yoshi couldn't, would take a hit over.
And, he could eat things, and if you ate enough things, you get an extra life. This is your buffer. And you're like, great, I'm going to walk into one of the Koopaling's castle with Yoshi, and what do you do? What do you mean you're getting off of Yoshi? What the hell? You mean I have to do this, the regular way?
What do you mean I can't bring my awesome dinosaur that breathes fire into this dungeon?
Yeah, what the
part of the Yoshi Union.
Wait, he demanded it wasn't part of his contract, so But
listen, I sign up to eat 30 shells per world. I not sign up to eat ghosts or Koopalings or those chomps or whatever. Fuck this, I'm out here. I'll see you in the next world.
I always wanted to use a Game Genie and just see what would happen if you had Yoshi in one of them, if he could eat the ghosts or if he could attack the Koopalings.
Oh, and of course that final battle with Bowser, the multiple-part battle, and that was great. That was great, and the ending was cute. It was just awesome. So, tons of replay value. Great game. We've spent 10 minutes just on Mario World. Let's move on. Okay, I brought up Mario World. Let's go around here. Let's go, Peter.
Well, how about Chrono Trigger? It's my most favorite of the system.
Lead on.
I don't know where to start. It's just simply awesome. I mean, you had a lot of role-playing games that had a very linear type of story, but Chrono Trigger, you weren't pulled by the leash quite so strictly, and just had more. The story elements just struck me like Magus. Here's the bad guy. You're always going after Magus all this time. Then when you finally come to the end, and then you find out maybe you don't want to kill him after all, and you have the option: either make him as your friend or to kill him. And then the game continues.
It doesn't really feel like you're getting pulled by the nose like some games do, where it's, oh, what do I have to do to get the next story part? This one, you're going through the story, and it just feels natural. It just flows.
You had some choice in the matter how you got to the end.
Yeah. This is a role-playing game with multiple endings, and we're talking very varied multiple endings, to the point where one of them is you save the world, only everyone gets turned into reptiles at the end of it.
Or you replace Magus and become the next Dark Lord.
So again, I mean, another game with, different endings, different possibilities. I mean, I know they expanded. I mean, I know the PlayStation re-release got 12 endings. Was that the same for the original Chrono Trigger?
Yes.
They could fit all that onto the cartridge. Okay.
Oh, they had many. Yes. They had many more than 12 if you count the variations, because each ending, depending on which ending it was, had 6 or so different variations depending on who you had in your team, who was alive, different parts of the story you'd completed or not completed.
And for a game of that magnitude, I mean, I didn't hear of this game until PlayStation. I know, shoot me.
Bang.
There, I'm dead. You're hosting the show now.
Yay.
That's your cunning plan, isn't it? Anyway, but Chrono Trigger, this is in my top 2 favorite games of all time. Chrono Trigger was just an amazing story, very, very intricate, very detailed, very nuanced, and that's basically, I mean, that's kind of a general thing you could say about the Super Nintendo. With the increased capability of its cartridges, you could allow for more nuanced stories.
Chrono Trigger just showed
why.
Ronnie first.
Yeah, right.
Chrono Trigger just showed what the Super Nintendo was capable of from an RPG perspective. Super Mario World showed exactly how far platformers could go in it, and as a release title, that showed a lot. But I think this Chrono Trigger really stretched what an RPG could do on the system.
Yeah, there's a reason why people consider the Super Nintendo like the era of the RPG, because literally there's like 10 RPGs in this system that got released, and all of them are AAA, very good. And we're talking like near perfect score, Famitsu level of good.
Yeah, I mean, and I agree. I think RPGs really, really started to hit their stride with Super Nintendo. I mean, Chrono Trigger is just one of them. Final Fantasy 4 and 6, or 2 and 3, as they were originally known as in the States.
It was a golden age.
It really, really was. I mean, yes, Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy 4 and 6 are Square titles, and so Square was really, I mean, just great storytelling. Great gameplay as well, but great storytelling.
Yeah, I mean, but it wasn't just them either. I mean, of course, you had Super Mario RPG, which had them as well, but you had Illusion of Gaia, which wasn't Capcom, which wasn't Squaresoft. You had the Lufia series, wasn't Capcom. I mean, it's just so many different RPGs that just came out of everywhere.
It was just an amazing flood of RPGs. I didn't.
Breath of Fire.
What?
Breath of Fire series.
Yes.
That was mentioned.
Great series.
I avoided that series. I don't know why. I mean, I had heard of it, but that was a series.
That's because you don't have a soul, Brian.
Well, we knew that. I'm just a disembodied voice.
Ah, hail the voice.
Oh, I knew we were going to get a reference there at some point. Thank you, Peter. But
Soulless Brian needs food badly.
And suddenly it's now Gauntlet. Suddenly we've switched to Gauntlet. Moving back slightly to platformers, you said that one of you said that Super Mario World showed how far platformers could go. Although I think the boundary was stretched a bit more with Donkey Kong Country.
Oh God, that was a melding of just genius and technology right there.
Donkey Kong Country 1, specifically the first game, is the second best-selling game for the Super Nintendo. And with damn good reason.
And it also helped that it was also bundled with the Super Nintendo at one point.
Yes, it was. That also... I mean, I don't think it needed to be bundled in. That game...
Oh, I don't deny how good Super Mario World or Donkey Kong Country are, but whenever I hear their sales numbers, I always wonder how they would have really stacked up if they hadn't been, bundled with the system.
Yes.
There should be like an asterisk next to them just for their reason why these are number 1 and number 2 is because they were at one point bundled with the system at launch.
That's because they were performance enhanced by the system. Just like
I mean, there's no doubt how good they really are, but I mean, if you'd put, and I know they're not by them, but if you'd put Chrono Trigger or any of the Final Fantasies in with it, they would have been the best seller. If you put Link to the Past in with the system, that would have been the best seller. I mean, whichever one you bundled with the system, that right there, regardless of how quality it is going to drastically increase it.
But yes, I mean, that's true. You should put an asterisk, like Major League Baseball records. But Donkey Kong Country was definitely a blend. I mean, Donkey Kong Country was probably one of the most visually stunning games I had ever seen up to that point.
Nintendo had took a SGI workstation, which was the top-of-the-line graphics computers you can buy for a business, rendered all these characters, and then translated that to sprites on the Super Nintendo. And the Super Nintendo had a resolution and color that's high enough to do it justice.
Yeah.
Not perfection, but certainly it's very convincing.
It was damn good looking. I mean, Donkey Kong Country, just from my own childhood, I spent so many hours playing multiplayer with my stepbrother. Hold on. Just because there were different play modes for Donkey Kong Country. You can go single player, 2-player co-op, or 2-player head-to-head. And the replay value there was trying to find all of the hidden bonus levels.
Golden bananas.
Yes. Now, Ronnie.
Well, the funny thing with Donkey Kong Country is if you took that and then you took a bunch of the PlayStation and Next Generation titles and put them head-to-head, Donkey Kong Country looked better than a lot of them. A whole lot of them.
Yes. Which is very true. I mean, especially the early PlayStation games. It was just, when they were still, pre-rendered graphics was still a pretty new thing.
Mm. But yeah, I mean, Donkey Kong couldn't hold up to the length of a lot of them since they have, much more space on the disc, but just in how it looked, they did things with the Super Nintendo that you didn't think the Super Nintendo could do.
Oh, yeah.
When they did.
Oh, yeah. Ronnie, throw out a game.
Throw out a game? Well, I suppose I'll touch on one that I don't think anyone else will ever bring up, and that is Ogre Battle. One of the introduction I had to the strategy genre, and one of my favorite games of all time.
I'll talk about it.
Enix goodness.
Yes, before it was Squeenix.
Oh, this was an Enix title.
Yes, it
Yeah,
is.
this is Enix.
Ogre Battle was a very long and complex story, which is one of the reasons it drew me to it, about you taking down an evil empire, and you could choose different routes through the game, liberating different cities and regions, and getting them to your side. And depending on what you did, there were multiple endings you could take. And depending on how you liberated them and how you completely annihilated the enemy, if you did, your reputation would go up or down, which led you to good or bad endings where you overthrow the empire to instate yourself as an emperor far worse and more dark than the previous one, or one where you reinstate the rightful prince, who you find throughout the game.
I thought the best part was actually the very beginning when you actually had to answer a series of questions to actually develop your character. You were not playing just yawn hero static, same person every time you play through.
So you're not a departure from Dragon Quest.
Yeah, you get a bunch of tarot cards that pop up, and each tarot card has a different question. You get different questions every time you play, and depending on what your answers are, it changes what your character's stats are, what their abilities are, and what they use, and what your starting reputation is.
Interesting. You said this was a strategy RPG?
Yes.
It's similar in line to Fire Tactics and Final Fantasy Tactics.
Aha.
Final Fantasy Tactics not really.
It's not as complex. It's not nearly as complex.
Well, no. Tactics is also turn-based. Ogre Battle was more real-time.
You're thinking Tactics Ogre, which was the sequel, which played exactly like it. Ogre Battle, I've never played another game. Brian, you should pick it up, just take a look at it sometime. I can't describe it because I've never played another game that plays like that.
We'll see. I'm not a big fan of strategy RPGs. I don't like my RPGs to be chess matches.
It's not really so much a chess match. You just have to deploy your troops, and then you tell them where to go, and they travel over time until they encounter the enemy, and then they duke it out.
Yeah, well, we'll see.
Go to YouTube.
Go to YouTube. Everything's on YouTube. Alrighty. Alright. Ron, your turn. Throw out a game.
I'm going to name two because they're very brief. One is Super Metroid, a Nintendo game. We talked about this in the Pirates and Bananas episode.
Ah, yes, the Metroid and Donkey Kong Love Fest, yes.
Yeah, that was just a very good game, and that game had story in it too, even though it is a shooter, or is a shooting RPG, which sounds kind of foreign to us. But it had quite a bit of story in there too, although it was very subtle and is very sort of implied. In the other game...
Yeah.
Go ahead. I had it written down. I just lost it. Where the hell did it go? Oh, here it is. The other game I was going to mention was the Mega Man X games.
Oh, yes.
Specifically, we'll just talk about the first one, where it's updating Mega Man to the 16-bit graphics, and it's a lot darker and a lot more sleek and very interesting compared to the original Mega Man games.
And they introduced Zero, which increased the amount of fangirls by 50%.
All right. Awesome. Excellent.
It was a Capcom game, and it had some very memorable things. You could get power-ups along the way, which is new for the Mega Man series. You could even get the Hadoken from Street Fighter if you were ever so inclined to.
And the Dragon Punch.
Yep. And it introduced Zero, which you got the fangirls, but it's a very good platforming shooter that really, with the graphical update and the music of that game too, is very nice as well.
Awesome, good stuff.
I remember it also being very difficult.
We still have some time left, so I will go around throwing out a couple more games out there that I wasted countless hours, days, weeks, and months on. The first I'll throw out is obviously the start of Mario Kart. Super Mario Kart was the first in a very successful franchise. How could you forget Super Mario Kart, which to this day I think is the only game that I've played that actually physically cheats? We all throw out that excuse.
There's several that do. Most racing games cheat.
Most racing games will cheat.
There are a lot of we use the excuse every time we're doing piss poorly on a game. Oh, the game's not being fair, it cheats. I think Mario Kart is actually makes it a true fact because
rubber banding.
Yeah, Mario Kart, some of the ways that it cheated was all of your computer opponents had special weapons that you yourself could never ever have.
Blue shell.
For not in the original. Not in the original. I think in the original, the most powerful weapon in the game was the lightning bolt. And blue shells wouldn't come in until Mario Kart 64. But, you know, Mario, for example, could use a star anytime he wanted to. Yoshi could throw eggs, you know, and try to obstruct you anytime. And, you know, if you were, all of your computer opponents had special moves that you couldn't do. And also, the game was guilty of, you just called it rubber banding. But one of the things I hated the most was the fact that, you know, you red shell an opponent and you knock him into 8th place, and then 3 seconds later he's right on your ass again. And, you know, you look at the bottom of the screen where all the other computers are, you know, you see him drift all the way to the back of the pack whenever you hit him, and suddenly he just zooms right through everybody. I'm like, hey! This isn't right. What do you mean this is pre-programmed shit? It's... But even...
Yet it was still relatively easy to beat.
It was. I mean, yes, 50, 100, and 150 cc on the original Mario Kart is a joke compared to today. However, the time...
It just feels so slow, too, if you compare it to any of the newer Mario Karts.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
I played it a little while ago, the original, and just...
Well,
nostalgia.
Yeah, but, I mean, there's one thing that the original Mario Kart has that none of the others have. The original Rainbow Road. It's, you know...
Yeah.
The original Rainbow Road, which still to this day is probably one of the hardest Mario Kart levels, because it's no walls.
There's a Rainbow Road
no
level.
No walls, you can drift pretty damn easy on the thing. You fall off, it's like 5 seconds to fall off before you lift it back up.
Yeah, I mean, it's... And of course the music for Rainbow Road, it just still is quite amazing. I mean, yes, all the other Mario Karts have Rainbow Road, but the one that I like the best is the original.
There's also a Rainbow Road level in F-Zero for the N64.
That must...
And it, too, is a pain in the ass.
Oh. And I think the last game I will mention, we'll go one more round from everybody. Another game that I spent, again, years and still am playing, Mortal Kombat. I have never, ever... I played Mortal Kombat on the consoles long before I even touched any one of them in the arcade. To me, playing Mortal Kombat in the arcade was strange and foreign. Because I was just so used to Super Nintendo controls for Mortal Kombat. And, you know, 10 years old, I was loving the blood and the violence. And, just totally... My stepbrother and I would spend so many hours a day playing that game, and he would beat my ass. And, you know, because he was the one that owned the Super Nintendo before I did. He also had the Game Gear versions of these games. So... It was
2-hour battery life and all?
Oh, yeah. But, you know, you could see the evolution easily. You know, Mortal Kombat 1, Mortal Kombat 2, Mortal Kombat 3. And if you remember, if you've ever played them, those actors were real. They were motion captured.
Mm-hmm.
This wasn't just some, you know, program some pixels. These were actual actors doing motion capture and then digitized for the games. I mean, Scorpion, classic. Sub-Zero, classic.
That was a big selling point compared to the Street Fighter series.
What?
Which never really worked out for them. The fact that it was motion captured.
Ah, okay. And of course, you know, the biggest draw from Mortal Kombat were the absurd, over-the-top fatalities. You know, just the cry of finish him, and then having 4 seconds to punch in a sequence of 30 buttons.
And the over-the-top, you know, the over-the-top bosses at the end. I mean, as much as Street Fighter, I mean, M. Bison, you gotta love M. Bison, but when you first saw Goro, and he first grabbed you and started beating you with his other set of hands, or when you saw in Mortal Kombat 2, I can't remember his name, but the Centaur.
Kintaro was Mortal Kombat 2. The Centaur was Motaro, Mortal Kombat 3.
I'm sorry. Either way.
Either way, you still got your ass handed to you. Because, yes, Goro, not only did he have the benefit of 4 arms, but he also had the benefit of extreme strength. You know...
Yeah, he hits you once, you lose like half of your life bar, whereas it takes about 5,000 hits for you to take him down.
Oh, yeah. And Motaro, they made him more ridiculous by making him teleport from one side of the screen to the other.
Like a centaur needs that.
Yes. And, you know, the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, power moves won't work on him. But, you know, then, of course, the series got silly with friendships and babalities and animalities and brutalities and babalities. It's... Although one of the things I particularly enjoyed about Mortal Kombat 3 was the fact that if you did a fatality, suddenly your opponent, when he exploded or became, you know, decapitated, suddenly there was like 6 torsos, 85 arms, 6 skulls. I never really understood that, but alright.
I'd like to think that as they pwned you and all of your descendants, and that's where all the bones came from.
I think so. But yes, timeless hours spent playing Mortal Kombat, and I'm still doing that. I just downloaded the arcade collection for PS3. So I've got Mortal Kombat 1, 2, and 3 on my PS3, and they've upgraded it by adding trophies and online leaderboards for them.
Oh, God.
So it's like recreating the high score competitions of the arcade years. So there you go. That's my spiel. Peter.
I want to talk music for a minute. Final Fantasy VI and ActRaiser.
Go ahead.
Huh?
I remember when I first played ActRaiser, I went, oh my god, that sounds almost like an orchestra.
Yes.
As close as you could get for the day.
Almost. Almost. We hadn't gotten to orchestral tracks yet. That wouldn't happen until PlayStation.
But that was close. And then the gameplay, just standard side-scrolling action, was pretty cool. But then you get to the simulator where you're actually trying to build a civilization afterwards.
And that was always a really... Just the way, like you said, the way that you separate between the two halves, that was one of my favorite parts of that game.
But I also remember when I played Final Fantasy VI, and here we go again with, like, oh my god, this almost sounds like real instruments. Almost. Not quite.
That's some damn good MIDI.
But the samples were the same. Well, technically it's actually digitally tracked, but not to be confused with something like a WAV or an MP3. More like an S3 or an IRIT, but...
Next podcast. Move on.
Alright, I'll explain that next podcast. But I just, like... That is the one... This music was one area where the Super Nintendo really, really pushed hard on. And ActRaiser, the Final Fantasies, and a few others were really on top of that. It's like you just said, like the opera scene from Final Fantasy VI. I remember the battle scene when you're fighting, like there's the battle theme when you're fighting an irregular battle. It sounded like there was a guitar playing in the background.
Yes.
And just the soundtracks were just so well done on some of these games.
They really were.
This is game music. This is like a new beginning to a new art form.
I also want to add into briefly, I enjoyed the story of 6 because it's a very adult story.
Yes. Yes, indeed. It's almost tear-jerking in parts.
And
Almost.
Kefka, how can you ever forget that laugh from Kefka? Arguably one of the most insane video game villains to date. Right up there with the guy from Xenosaga.
Albedo.
What was his name again? Albedo.
Albedo, yes.
Yeah.
And one of the things about Kefka is he's one of the few villains that actually succeeds.
Yeah.
You know,
he
plot,
succeeds.
plot,
He destroys the world.
you know, plot spoiler, but he actually does succeed.
You just have to overthrow him
Kefka will
afterwards.
become a god and blow up the world. He succeeds.
He actually succeeds, you know. Not only does he monologue, but he succeeds. So there you go. I would love to see if they're gonna do a full-on remake of a game. One of the few remakes I might actually condone is Final Fantasy VI. If they were to completely redo that for, say, PS3. You know,
I'd love to see the full motion video of him kicking the Emperor in the butt and knocking him off.
Because you know they'd
Final
give
Fantasy 6 and Final Fantasy 13 graphics. Let's have that.
because you know they'd give Kefka a very high-pitched maniacal laugh. So there we go. Peter, anything more that you have to say on those?
I think we hit all the major points. Just that timeless classics.
All right, let's
Some
shift.
of the best times I've had.
Let's shift to Ronnie. One more from you.
Well, to go from a game with a very adult story to one that really had a very childlike story, but an innocence about it, Super Mario RPG, the brainchild of Squaresoft and Nintendo.
The only time you will hear Final Fantasy music in a Mario game.
Yep, and to me, Super Mario RPG was it was a melding of all the different things that made the Super Nintendo great. I mean, it had memorable music, the graphics were great. I mean, it had a great story, which, I mean, it had more story than any Mario game to date had had. And just everything, including getting for the first time, you know, Bowser on your team.
Yes! Yes!
You had platforming in that, too.
Yep, there was a bit of platforming in there, but yes, Bowser on your team, that was a first.
The first of many times.
I think at that point when I played Super Mario RPG, I think it was the first Mario game I had played, and it might have been the first Mario game up at that point in which Bowser was not the main antagonist. I could be wrong, but I think that was probably the first.
I'm pretty sure you're right. Other than, you know, Donkey Kong.
Excluding Mario 2.
With Wart, yes.
Yes, you're right. You're right. I try to block Mario 2 out of my memory because I don't consider that a Mario game. But whatever.
It is canonically challenged.
I know that, but anyway. But
and
yes.
then, of course, fighting Kulex in Super Mario RPG for everybody who loves bonus bosses that come from Final Fantasy.
Yes, optional boss. Very optional boss. Complete with the Final Fantasy IV boss music and victory music.
And 4 crystals that represent the elements. I wonder where I've seen this before.
Oh, I don't know. Well, this was also... I mean, Nintendo wasn't afraid to loan out its characters.
But at least at this point in time.
Samus and Link were both also in the game, so you had cameos, too.
Yes. Yes, you did. It was, you know... And you're right, Super Mario RPG was another game that I spent way too much time playing. It was one of the first games I actually downloaded for Virtual Console. It was just beautiful. Geno. It's and you know just some of the hilarity in that game. You know, Peach just laying the smack down with, you know, a frying pan, glove.
Just the ridiculous things, and of course Mallow with his fists. Yeah.
And the unique battle mechanic where if you timed your attack just right, if you hit...
Well, yes, you get your extra bonus, but it was even better when you had things such as your jumping move, where you could keep bouncing off of them continuously
if you timed it correctly, yes.
Mario Super Jump, where as long as you kept timing it rightly, the move kept going on. You could, if in theory, and I'm stressing in theory, if you timed it right, you could kill a boss in one shot with this move.
But again, the timing would have been incredible. It was... But yes, in theory, it could be done. It was just a wonderfully written game. And, you know, the music, again, very memorable. It was done by Yoko Shimomura. That was her first video game that she composed. For those of you who don't know who she is, you're probably more familiar with her work in Kingdom Hearts. So, that's just interesting side bit there. All right, Ron, we will close with you. One more from you.
All right. I'm going to go since we've mentioned like nearly everything that I've owned and played or beaten. I'm going to go with the one that didn't get mentioned, Earthbound. And this we brought up in the games that the Hidden Gems episodes. And that was a game that was like one of the very first games that I've played on the Super Nintendo. And
Really?
I just have lots of memories on.
Really? I mean, Earthbound is still considered a cult classic. It's where we get NES from for those of you listening.
And a
Yeah,
game
I mean,
we'll
this
never
was
see here.
like a.
As you were saying.
I was gonna say, this was like, I mean, when I first got the Super Nintendo, I got Super Nintendo and then Super Mario World, and then Christmas was coming up at that time, so I said I want Final Fantasy 3, and I want this game called Earthbound because it looked very childish and very like colorful, and me and my 8-year-old self was thinking, this would be perfect, and this would be like a fun game, and I played Final Fantasy 6 for a couple hours, and then I went to Earthbound, and I basically spent my entire Christmas break playing Earthbound and beating that.
Yes. Good old Earthbound. Which was kind of an interesting game. It was, I mean, yes, it was an RPG. At least it's considered an RPG. But it has some nifty little quirks to it. I mean, originally it wasn't all that popular coming out of the gate. It now has amassed, again, a cult following in the years since. So there you go. It's... we could go on for many more hours, but we do have to draw this thing to a close. As I said, this is by no means an exhaustive list, And so, for those of you who are listening and you want to throw in your memories of Super Nintendo goodness and juiciness, you can do it one of two ways. You can go onto our Facebook page at facebook.com/downloadable content, post a comment there, talk about it, post your favorite Super Nintendo memory, game, what have you. Love to see it. You could also send us a tweet on Twitter, that newfangled piece of technology. You can find us on Twitter at DLContent. Again, send us your thoughts, opinions, memories, reminiscences. Love to hear it. So, I think that is going to wrap up this Super Nintendo Love Fest. And so I would like to thank Peter, Ron, and Ronnie for waxing nostalgia as we take a trip down memory lane. I'm sure there'll be more. But on that fun note, have a good one, everybody.